Hey everyone, it's Carissa Wiley at sprinkledwithglitter.com. Thanks for joining me today. Today I am sharing another video in my one palette series. It's been a while since I've done one of these, but I am creating 3 cards using the same color palette, and I love this color palette. Now here's a look at the palette and the products that I'll be using today. These pair so well together to create some fun, colorful, modern cards. I'm using some new products from the Christina Werner line available at Concord and Ninth. I'm using the Thank You Word bundle, which includes the stamp set as well as a coordinating die set. And if you love this, you will love the other products that are similar in this line. There is a Merry and a Happy Birthday one. So I'll be sure to direct you to some video tutorials that I've created with those. These are also great for shaker cards. Next up is the Missing Your Hugs bundle, and this includes this large 6x8 stamp set with several large greetings as well as some small sub-sentiments, and there is a die set available to go with it. I love that little Missing You die that's there in the center. It has some great hearts in it as well. Now here's my palette, and I used this in a YouTube Carissa Crafts live stream a couple of weeks ago, and everyone loved it, including me. It's a palette that has a lot of purple in it, and never did I think I would love a palette with purple so much. I have fallen in love, and I decided we needed to revisit it again, and we might even revisit it 1 more or 2 more or 5 more times this season, because it's definitely a favorite color palette for spring. Now I'm starting out with 6 colors of cardstock because that's how many letters are in the word thanks. And I'm placing this orchid cardstock. This is a Spellbinders color wheel cardstock, placing it into my Misty stamping tool. And I'm lining up my thanks word along the bottom. I'm prepping the surface with a powder tool, and then I'm inking up my stamp with Versamark ink and stamping onto my cardstock. Now when I stamp this, I'm going to be very careful that I am not overdoing the pressure, because this stamp has very fine lines on it and I don't want to blow them out. I want them to keep their delicate nature. So rather than putting a lot of pressure on this, I'm just going to take my time, and if I need to re-ink, I'm going to re-ink again. You can see I'm not putting a ton of force or a ton of pressure because I can always stamp multiple times to get the covering of ink that I need. Now that I'm done with the orchid cardstock, I'm going to move on to nectar cardstock. Again, prepping the surface, inking the stamp with Versamark ink, and stamping onto the surface as many times as I need to get the coverage that I feel like I need for the embossing powder that I'm going to be using. Once I have a couple colors of cardstock stamped, I'm going to take this over and add some super fine detail white opaque embossing powder. This is from Wow, onto my cardstock. I'm going to flick off any excess, and then I'm going to heat set those so that the powder is nice and smooth and shiny. It doesn't look granular and it doesn't look dull. Now I repeated that process with all 6 colors of cardstock, and once those are heat embossed and cooled, I'm taking a clean dry cloth and I'm wiping away any of the excess powder tool that's left behind. Now next up, I'm going to die cut these, but I decided I didn't want to take the chance of marring the surface of all of this cardstock at the top, so I went ahead and trimmed these down before I sent them through my die cutting machine. I've lined up my die, and when I place this through my die cut machine, I'm going to actually place it through the long way, and this is going to keep this magnetic mat from warping too much. It's going to keep the die from shifting. This is actually a tip that I got from Christina Werner's introduction video. And as I run these through, I'm going to make sure the center part of that A is knocked out of the die, because if you get a couple layers of cardstock in there, it won't die cut after time. Now I brought my Empress over so that you can see how I'm running this through. On the white cardstock, it doesn't matter as much because I'm not lining it up with a stamped image. I just made sure that I ran all those die cuts through, and then I cut 6 layers of white cardstock. I'm adding 3 layers thick of these thanks words together with that white cardstock, so I'm building up some dimension. Now, in the end, I'm going to end up with 2 sets of this thanks die, and each of those sets is going to have 3 layers of white cardstock. You can see I'm just placing them under the block as I stack up those layers to make sure they dry and adhere well together. Then I'm going to start sorting through my colored letters and making some combinations that are pleasing to me. Now, these are the two here that I'm going to actually use on my cards because they are purple heavy and they have purple in the center, but you can see I made 4 other versions and I can make 4 other cards with all of these die cut letters, and I think I'm going to do that today. Once I have the 2 that I want to use, I'm going to add liquid glue to the front of those stacked up die cuts, and then I'm going to add the colored and stamped versions on top. I'm just working my way across. I'm using orchid, nectar, lemongrass, tide pool, juniper, and mulberry cardstocks, and I'll have all of those linked in the YouTube description below. I repeated the process with the second set of colored letters, and then I allowed that to dry. Now, this product is not new, but I am totally obsessed with it. It is the Christina Werner Diagonal Lines background stamp, and I'm stamping it in VersaFine Clair Nocturne Pigment ink onto Concord and 9th white cardstock. Now, I had a little fuzzy in the center of this, and then as I stamped this, because I had butted it so far up against the corner of my Misty stamping tool, I was having a hard time getting the edges to stamp, and when I pressed it too hard, the lines got blown out. So I did have to trim off the edges to avoid kind of those blown out lines. If you're going to do this, I do recommend kind of floating the stamp just slightly away from the edge of the Misty. Now I trimmed down 2 little strips of that measure 5/8 inch wide, and they're 5.5 inches tall. And I'm making 2 card bases that are 3.5 inches wide by 5.5 inches tall. So I've cut them at 3.5 inches by 11 inches, and then I'm scoring at 5.5 inches to create my 2 card bases. This is a fun card size to create with, and it is actually like the perfect matting size for these word dies that I'm using today. I'm using some tape runner adhesive to add the striped cardstock that I created with that Diagonal Lines background stamp onto the left edge of my card front. And then I'm going to run a line of liquid glue along that cardstock edge, and I'm going to add some diamond glitter cardstock that's cut to about 1/8 of an inch wide. This diamond glitter cardstock is from the Stamp Market, and it shines like none other. I'm going to just hold that in place while it kind of sets up a little bit. This cardstock is kind of curled a little bit because I cut it at such a fine line. And then I'm going to start arranging my letters. Now, in order to do this, I am using a Concord and 9th turnabout jig, and I'm kind of using the A2 outline to help me make sure that I get all of these letters within the vertical height that I have. And I'm using the grid lines to make sure that my letters are lined up both horizontally and vertically. And once I know that I have a great and pleasing position, I'm just checking my positioning here before I move on to the next step, because obviously I can move these all around in one piece, but I can't do anything with them until I transfer them. So I grabbed a second sticky mat, and this one's a little stickier than the one I have beneath it, and I pressed that over the top of my lined up letters, and I was able to transfer these from one mat to the other. And now I have the backside exposed where I can add my adhesive. Now you can check your placement again on your card project to make sure they're exactly where you want, because you can see through this mat. But for now, I'm just going to flip this over and add some liquid glue to the back side of each of these letters. Once I have the liquid glue on all of the letters, I can pick up my mat, take it over to my card front, and position my letters, all 6 of them at one time, and I know that they're perfectly lined up. I'm also lining up the grid lines on that sticky mat with the edges of my card front to make sure that everything is straight and perpendicular and all the things. And then I'm going to place a heavy block over that, and I'm going to leave it and let those letters dry. Now for my second arrangement, I am using the purples at the opposite ends. And this time, instead of lining everything up kind of horizontally, I'm doing a staggered pattern. Again, I am using that turnabout jig on the bottom and the A2 guideline that's there to make sure that I get everything within the vertical height that I have, that I'm working with on this card. And once I check the placement on my card front, I need to transfer it to that other sticky mat that's a little bit stickier. And my letters on this one have dried, so I can go ahead and peel that up, and you can see my perfectly placed layers. I'll then take that second sticky mat, and you could do this with press and seal as well, but honestly, I don't keep press and seal. I don't even have it in my house, I don't think. So anyway, I just peeled that sticky mat off of my first card project, and now I'm placing it over my second group of letters that are lined up here. I peeled away the all-in-one turnabout jig, and again, I'm adding some liquid glue to the back side of these letters, and I'm going to place them onto my card front using that sticky mat. Again, I'm going to add my clear block over the top, and I'm just going to let these dry. I'm not going to touch them. I'm actually going to move it aside and then put the clear block over the top. For some embellishments on both of my card projects, I use the heart dies from the Missing Your Hugs bundle. I love these because they have these little delicate outline hearts. These are like my absolute favorite kind of hearts. And there's a few sizes in this die set, and I've die cut them out of some diamond glitter cardstock. I've also heat embossed a couple of the smaller sentiments from the Thank You Words bundle, and I'm using the included banner shaped die to die cut those out. Once I die cut this full length of the banner, I'm going to rotate this and reposition the die to cut this to a shorter strip. So I'm just making sure that that die cut fits within the cutting lines of the die, and then I can adjust the length of it by sliding the die left or right and run that through my die cut machine to get the perfectly sized banner. I'm going to repeat this process for the other sentiment strip that I created, and then I'm going to use some foam adhesive to adhere these onto my card projects. This sentiment actually said, "Just a note to say thanks," and I trimmed it down so it says, "A note to say thanks," and I'm positioning that where it overlaps the T at the beginning. And the sentiment for this card says, "For your kindness," and I'm allowing that to overlap the letters at the bottom of this arrangement. So a couple of different arrangements here, all from the same stamping and die cutting process that I used from the get-go. I'll add my little hearts on using some liquid glue, and that completes my first two cards featuring this fabulous spring palette that includes purples. Look at this. I love these fun modern cards, and I did create a Mary card using the Mary version of these dies and stamps, and I'll make sure that I throw a card for that up in the upper right-hand corner. So let's move on to our next card design. I'm starting out with this large Missing Your Hugs stamp from the Missing Your Hugs bundle, and I'm placing it into my Misty stamping tool along with a piece of white cardstock, and I'm inking this up with mushroom ink. Now, we had this whole conversation during my live stream the other day about how wonderful mushroom ink is. If you're wanting something that's contrasting, but maybe not quite as harsh as a black, this makes a great alternative. You can see I'm pressing gently over the entire surface, and then I am going to grab the coordinating die to die cut the shadow of that sentiment, and I'm also going to grab the Hugs word die. Now, this Hugs word die is the exact same size as the actual stamp, so you're going to see me combine both the stamp and the die together. I'm die cutting the Hugs word from this mulberry cardstock. I'm also going to die cut it from nectar cardstock, tide pool cardstock, and juniper. And I'm also going to die cut a layer of white cardstock. And we're going to trim out the letters and reconnect them to create one multicolored word. Now, to remove my die cuts from the dies, I like to just smack my die on the table or throw it at the table, and that oftentimes will release these intricate dies without harm. Now, I'm going to take this shadow layer, line it up around my stamped image, and I'm also going to take that Hugs word and die cut the white cardstock here. I'll run that through my Impress machine, and now I'm ready to kind of start assembling my multicolored die cut word. So we're going to do a little die cut surgery. We're going to take each of these words and we're going to trim one letter out from each word. So I'm starting out by cutting the portion where the U and the H meet so that I'm left with just the H. Then I'm going to add some liquid glue to that white die cut layer and adhere that H right over the top of this base layer that I've created. Once I have that in place, I'm going to pick up the nectar one and trim in that same exact spot. And I'm going to layer this on top of the Tide Pool version as I do my next trim so that I can make sure that my cut line is in the same place on the in-between of that U and G. So I'm just trimming right between the U and the G on both layers. So the nectar is stacked up over the top of the Tide Pool, and I'm just going to sneak my scissors between the U and the G. I'm actually going to trim the G, the S off the G first, make that a little easier to kind of manage, and then I'll trim between the U and the G. Then I'll use the nectar U and place that onto my white cardstock backer, and I'm going to use the Tide Pool G and place that onto my white cardstock backer. You may find that a pickup tool or some tweezers may be helpful for this process because they are pretty fine and delicate. Finally, I'm just going to trim the S away from the juniper die cut, and then I will add that onto my cardstock backer as well. And I did die cut a couple more layers of the white cardstock and nestled that behind this Hugs word to give it a little bit of dimension so that when I place it over the top of the stamped image, it definitely has more raise and dimension than just kind of a flat die cut. Once I have this all assembled, I'm going to add some dots of liquid glue over my stamped image, and then I'm going to take my multicolored die cut and place it right over the top. It's going to conceal the stamped letters underneath, but if you wanted to, you could actually offset this and create a shadow with the stamping behind it. In that case, I would just add my liquid glue to my die cut piece and place it kind of at a offset. But I'm placing it directly over the top, and I love the look of this mix of the stamp and the die cut elements together. Here's an up-close look of that, and it is pretty easy to do and definitely worth the time in my opinion. So now I'm going to create a background for my card front, and I'm using the new Pretty Posies background stamp from Christina Werner's March 2025 collection. By the way, I have all of the Concord and 9th March 2025 bundle linked below, as well as Christina's release from March of 2025 linked below. I'm positioning my stamp in my Misty stamping tool, and then I have my cardstock here, which is some white cardstock. I am using a Tide Pool ink cube to partially ink this Pretty Posies background. I want kind of a cascading design coming from the upper left kind of towards the right. And I just wanted a little bit of pattern on this card. I didn't want to overwhelm it because I want the sentiment to stay center stage. Now, once I have that inked up, you can see I have it at kind of a diagonal there. I'm going to press this onto my cardstock, and I didn't ink up the very top floral piece of this, and I kind of regretted it. So I positioned my paper back into my Misty stamping tool where it was lined up before, and then I re-inked that upper left-hand corner. It's actually the right-hand side of the stamp at this time because remember, you're looking at a mirror image. So I just inked up that small portion and stamped that, and that gave me the look that I was looking for. Now I use the A2 thin frames die to die cut this panel down because I wanted the size of this rectangle. This also creates a nice thin frame, but I'm just using the center panel of this. So keep in mind, you can use it to create that nice thin frame, but you can also use it to create a panel. I also die cut another shadow layer from this mulberry cardstock, and I'm going to stack that up eventually. But before I do that, I'm going to stamp this everyday sub sentiment into the lower right-hand corner using, again, that mushroom ink. And I'm using my Misty stamping tool to make sure I get that perfectly positioned. Now, I noticed as I was doing the stacked up offset that these little curly cues kind of looked funky coming out from the right-hand side of this kind of stacked up layer. So I just trimmed those off, and then I added some tape runner adhesive to the back of my stamped and die cut sentiment here. And I'm placing this onto that second shadow layer with a little offset. So I'm dropping it down just a little bit and to the right a little bit. And that gives me just some extra color behind. I will then attach one of those little heart rings to the side of my sentiment. And I'm going to add this entire sentiment onto my card front using some foam adhesive. Now I decided I wanted a little bit of that black and white along the bottom, so I trimmed about a 3/8 of an inch strip, and I'm placing it with some tape runner adhesive along the bottom of my card front, and I'll just trim off any excess. And then I can take this entire card front, add some foam adhesive to the back, and place it onto a fog gray card base. This gray looks fabulous with this color palette, and it just kind of gives this color palette a more soothing feel. So that finishes off our third card for today. You can see I added a couple more of those glitter die cut hearts as embellishments, and I absolutely love the way this card project turned out. So there you have it, 3 cards, 1 color palette, my favorite color palette for spring. I'm sure you're going to see me use it over and over again as I create throughout the spring because I am absolutely in love with this palette, and it has taken me by surprise because I've never been a purple girl. So let me know in the comments below which of these 3 cards is your favorite. I would love to hear from you. Is this a palette that you're going to try and you're creating anytime soon? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. As always, I will have links to the featured products used in these projects in the YouTube description below. So if you're looking for something in particular, be sure you check there. And I want to say thank you in advance for using my links below. Thanks so much for stopping by and hanging out with me today. I am so glad you're here. I hope you enjoyed these projects, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications here so you don't miss any of my paper crafting and card making video tutorials, as well as my Carissa Crafts live stream broadcasts. I hope to see you there. You definitely want to stay tuned this week because I have so much inspiration for you. 4 pre-recorded videos this week. I will not be live on Friday because I'll be out of town, but I have so much inspiration for you anyway. So I hope to see you around, and don't forget to say hi to me in the comments when you do stop by. Thanks again for watching. I'm so glad you're here. You all make this the best part of my day. And until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the very end. You know, if you've made it this far, you are one of my favorites. To subscribe to my channel, go ahead and click the button on the left side of the screen. And here's a couple more video tutorials I thought you might enjoy.